goddess. Psyche is the act of transformation. It is not a thing. Your psyche is not a thing. It is the process of adapting to change, which is the same thing chi is. You look at the character of chi, you see it is steam above a pot with rice inside. It is the transformation of something from a raw material into something useful. Chi and psyche are the same thing. It is a capacity to change and to adapt. When we don't adapt, when we don't change, we die. So, the nature of psychological distress is not in its occurrence, rather than the effective coping mechanism of the function. So it isn't the emotions per se, it is how we deal with those emotions. It is about our relationship to our experience. I mean, what is an emotion? It is a psychophysical event that informs us and others at a level very subtle about the truth of the situation. And in Japan, there's a concept called wa. And wa means you do not disturb the social relationship of things by abnormal behavior. So everybody is in tune with each other, and they know what each other person is experiencing, and they're emotional. So they don't have to be demonstrated. It is felt socially. And people, that is cancer patients, who have good social relationships have better survival rates and lower levels of metastases. If you have good family and good social supports, there is an alteration in the psychoneuroimmunological endocrine function. So again, when we look at cancer, we don't see cancer as a disease of the body, we see the disease, it is a social disease. It is a disease of isolation, as well as all the other kinds of exogenous environmental factors that go there. There are a number of relationships, psychological disorder and cancer, so we know that there is a link. We don't know necessarily if they're causal. People who are depressed probably get cancer more frequently than those who don't. People who have cancer are depressed, not necessarily because of the diagnosis of cancer. They are depressed before that cancer is. So there is a relationship, although not necessarily causal. There is a study of breast cancer, all failed to relieve any significant association between the diagnosis of cancer and life stressful events. So again, these sort of studies have said emotions don't cause cancer. However, there is some research on emotional distress in immune and neurological function. Stress causes an impact on the immune system. So maybe the relationship between stress, depression, emotions, and cancer are related through the immune system, through the endocrine system. Depressed individuals tend to display increased cortisol levels. So when we look at that, and I'm sure you know, when you activate the HPA axis, again, this is activated automatically. It is not something that may be perceived. There are lots of people who are walking around depressed and stressed who are oblivious to that. That's the difference between emotion and feeling. You have to be aware, and that's what psychotherapy does, is help us become aware of what we're feeling. Somebody once said that anybody who has a waist-hip ratio where the waist is larger than their hips is depressed. Now, is that true? It's a generalization, but there is some truth in it, just simply because of the neurological factors that are associated. Stress situations appear to reduce the risk. Here's another contrary study that looked at that stress actually reduces malignancy. Now, I think, and I don't have the study here, an interesting study they did with rats. Rats are cheap. They took some rats and they kept them in a family environment or a social environment where they were all together, and they measured their stress levels, cortisol levels, life expectancy, and so forth, a number of aging factors. Then they took rats and put them into new environments constantly, and they measured those factors. And then they took another third group of rats that introduced them into novel environments, kept them there until they adjusted, and then took them out and introduced them to new ones. That last group had greater life expectancy. The right kind of stress keeps us healthy. Not enough stress kills us, too much stress kills us. And that's very subjective. What your HPA axis, what your sympathetic nervous system does, is unique to you. There are genetic reasons, social reasons, familial reasons, and so forth. So it can't be generalized, but certainly we need the right amount of stress to keep ourselves healthy. Inflammation and stress. Depression immune function, which have found reductions in lymphocyte activity and elevations in inflammation. Data meta-analysis of change in HPA action functions of cortisol was significantly elevated in individuals who had developed depression in the context of chronic stress. In other words, if you are stressed and you're constantly activating the HPA axis was developed in humans and in primates as a way of dealing with change. There's a stressful environment, we activate sympathetic nervous system, we activate the endocrine system, we become prepared to meet that challenge with elevated blood pressure, elevated glucose levels, and we move towards resolving those. And those things would happen within a period of a half an hour, 45 minutes, and then it would be resolved. You'd either be dead or you would survive. And you would then rest. We have now an environment where people are exposed to these stressors on an ongoing basis. For example, without a sense of control over those. For example, we know that people who are working on the factory floor have higher levels of stress with very little responsibility than the CEO of the company, who's working 12, 14-hour days. Why is that? Because the CEO and people in senior levels feel they have control of their environment. Whether they do or not is irrelevant, but the feeling that you control outcomes alters the impact of stress on the body mind. So when you are exposed to these stressors without resolution to those stressors, you develop elevated levels of inflammatory cytokines. And we also know that these elevated cytokines are small enough to pass through the blood-brain barrier, and they lodge in the brain, and they act as neurotransmitters. And they have a direct impact on the nervous system, not only on the nervous system as in the central nervous system, but the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system. Where do you hold your stress? In your heart, in your gut, or in your bowel? In Chinese medicine, we refer to these as Sanjiao, the three centers. Porges wrote on the subject of the vagal nervous tone, and he talked about these three centers which are controlled by the vagal nerve. It is the social nervous system. When the social nervous system is disrupted, we get impact in one of these three centers. Anyway, he's just written a new book that's come out. I haven't seen it yet. It's very interesting. Do you know his work? No, Porges? P-O-R-G-E-S, University of Chicago. He started writing, anyway, I won't go into it, but he really looks at the vagal nervous system as a separate component of the autonomic nervous system, which controls our social relationships. It impacts how we hear, how we speak. It impacts our heart, our blood pressure, our stomach, our epigastric function, digestion, and elimination. How many people who are stressed have irritable bowel syndrome? Glaser suggests that both major and minor stressful events have health implications, both observation. Sudden onset of worsening of a variety of illnesses. Now again, clinically, those of you who are working with patients know that a stressful environment will recapitulate a disease. People may be in remission on cancer, and all of a sudden something happens in which they feel out of control, and the cancer comes back. They go out of remission. And so again, it is the regulation of the psychoneuroimmunoendocrine system that is dysregulated that impacts tumors.